Hello and welcome to the course Social Behavior and the Brain, an introduction to social neuroscience. I am Dr. Ark Verma, an associate professor at the Department of Cognitive Science at IIT Kanpur. This is week 8 where we are talking about social affect processing with a focus on negative affect and the role of the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Now, in the previous lecture just concluded, we were talking about the idea that the symbolic processing of affect in the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex could be the driving force in the inhibitory activity in limbic regions such as the amygdala, the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, which are associated with processing affective experience. In the current lecture, let's try and look at the neural feasibility of the same. How does the RVL-PFC do that? What are the neural sort of pathways or neural mechanisms that might be allowing the RVL-PFC to pull off such a role, pull off such a processing. Now, the RVL-PFC typically has strong bidirectional connections to both of these regions, the insula and the amygdala. The neuroanatomical connections from the RVL-PFC to the amygdala are relatively more complex on the one hand, and there are direct connections from the RVL-PFC to the amygdala. Remember, the amygdala is one of the regions that is responsible for quick processing of emotional information, for immediate identification of both positive and negative, mainly negative, and threat information that is present in the environment. And you can see that the fact that the RVL-PFC has a direct connection to it, it seems that in cases where immediate dampening is required through these direct projections from the RVL-PFC to the amygdala, that actually can be achieved. It is neurally feasible. Now, Carmichael and Price made anterograde tracer injections into area 12L, the region which is homologous to Brodmann's area 47 in humans. They found that the projection of this area 12L to the basolateral nucleus of the amygdala. So, they again it is just basically tells us that it is connected, this region is connected directly to the amygdala. Interestingly, these projections are not particularly dense, causing calling into question whether these direct projections may be sufficient to allow the RVL-PFC to regulate what the amygdala is responding or how the amygdala is responding. So, while there are these direct projections, they are not very dense. So, you may wonder, or neuroscientists wonder whether it is enough for the RVL-PFC to modulate the amygdala responses. Remember, all the stereotypes that we've been talking about, the negative emotions we've been talking about, aspects of fear, aspects of danger, threat calculation, all of that is something that the amygdala does. If you have to down-regulate these the experience of these negative feelings, it is it seems apt that the responses of the amygdala be regulated. And the RVL-PFC seems to be in an ideal position to do that. Now, as suggested by Phelps and colleagues, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex could also be having this effect on the amygdala indirectly by way of its projections from RVL-PFC to the medial prefrontal cortex, which in turn has rather dense projections to the amygdala. So, remember, whenever we are talking about empathy, whenever we are talking about regulation of stereotypes or emotional responses throughout this course, or whenever we you study about emotional regulation, control and so on, the medial prefrontal cortex is the critical region. It seems to be the most important region there. Now, we are working with the possibility of the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex playing this role in down regulation of this negative affective experience through the symbolic processing of affect. Now, there are two possibilities. Either the RVL-PFC is able to modulate amygdala response by direct connections to the amygdala, which it has, but does not have too dense a connection. So, people were wondering how this can be pulled off. So, there emerges this alternate track, this alternate pathway, that maybe the RVL-PFC is modulating the responses of the amygdala by modulating the connection between the medial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And this is something that seems plausible because the medial prefrontal cortex is known to regulate the amygdala in studies of extinction of fear and so on. So, it seems that maybe there is this indirect connection that is working its way through, and that is helping this down regulation of negative affect that we are observing. Also, research suggests that the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex not only inhibits motor and cognitive responses, but also inhibits negative affective responses, both in terms of subjective reports of negative affect and in terms of activity in the limbic regions associated with negative affect and distress. So, it basically seems that RVL PFC, if you remember from the previous lecture, if you remember from the lecture before that, is involved in all kinds of inhibition, mainly however motor inhibition, also cognitive responses while you are doing expressive writing or reflecting upon your negative feelings. It also inhibits, it is also known to inhibit negative affective responses, both in terms of subjective reports of how you are feeling, how angry or how enraged or how disgusted you are feeling at any point in time. And it is doing this by modulating the activity in the limbic regions. Remember the amygdala, the insula, the anterior cingulate cortex and so on, the limbic circuit for emotional processing. So far if you look at the previous lecture and this one, there seems to be a certain role for the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex in inhibitory processes, in symbolic processing of negative affect, also in possessing the neuroanatomical connection to the limbic regions, which is perhaps not really a giant leap to suggest that RVL PFC, from this it does not seem to be a giant leap to suggest that the RVL PFC may be contributing to the inhibition of motoric, cognitive and affective responses. So, it seems that this region is ideally placed to exercise this influence to modulate the activity not only in the amygdala, but in the entire limbic circuit. This basic idea is basically the proposal that Lieberman puts out, and he says that this disruption of negative affect that we have been talking about since the first lecture of this week is mediated through this critical region called the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. So, this serves as a critical stepping stone to full-blown disruption effects that we are now going to discuss. Again, start. So, RVL PFC is one of the regions that has been associated with increased pain analgesia. More recently, a number of studies have observed that placebo effects appear to be mediated by RVL PFC along with the rostral ACC, rostral anterior cingulate cortex. In one study, Lieberman and colleagues examined a group of patients with irritable bowel syndrome, which is a chronic pain condition associated with heightened pain sensitivity in the limbic system. The irritable bowel syndrome patients were scanned prior to and then again after receiving 3 weeks of sham treatments, just placebo, for their pain. During each scanning session, patients received painful rectal stimulation, simulating the symptoms of how the IBS really manifests, and generating a measure of current neural responses to the stimulation. How much pain they are feeling, it's basically being measured during these scans. Now, Lieberman and colleagues find that to the extent that participants reported improvements in the pain symptoms, at the end of the placebo regimen compared to before the regimen began, they also showed increased activity in the RVL PFC and decreased activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex from the first scan session to the second. So, as they are reporting feeling better, again remember that this is just placebo treatment happening, there is no actual medication or treatment that is being given to these people, but it is being done across a number of days and across a number of sessions. The degree to which they are reporting that, oh, we are feeling less pain, oh, things are getting better, etc., is correlated with the degree of activity, with the increase in the degree of activity in this right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. So, it seems that this is the region which is indeed involved in the placebo effect, in the placebo treatment that is happening, and that is contributing to this relief from pain in these IBS patients. And this is not only this is not the single study, there are several other studies which have observed within session placebo effects associated with increased RVL-PFC activity and decreased limbic activity in the domains of physical pain. So, it is not only that the RVL-PFC is helping people out with respect to diminishing the phenomenal experience of negatively experienced emotions, but also in domains of physical pain. So, it seems to be a very, very critical area in that respect. Now, the authors examined the role of the RVL-PFC in the regulation of social pain as well, the pain that comes from observing, the society around us, the injustice, the unfairness, the discrimination, the stereotypes. There are so many things to be sort of unhappy or sad about. Or say, for example, more personally, the distress associated with social rejection, when you are treated unfairly, when people don't give you their due, and so on and so forth. So, in one study, participants were ostensibly playing a game of internet catch with two other players who were again computer simulation. So, basically there is only one human player. Part of the way through the game, what happens is the other players stop throwing the ball. This is just a game of catch. Okay, so if three people are there, you are throwing the ball, and it's almost like it goes in a triangle or a circle depending on how many people are there. So I pass on the ball to player 1 passes to player 2 passes back to me, and so on. Now this is happening on the internet. So there are two other players who are just computer simulations, and there is one human player. What is happening? Part of the way through the game, the other players stopped throwing the ball to this participant and thus excluded the participant for the rest of the game. Alright. So, basically something is going on, and then you are rejected or excluded out of that. This one and numerous other studies have demonstrated that this kind of exclusion or this kind of exclusion manipulation basically causes considerable distress in the participants, a lot of disappointment and hurt in these participants, even in cases when they know that the other two players are just computer simulation. So, it is not that somebody is actively hurting them, it is just that the system is sort of designed that way that the computer simulation is now playing amongst itself and not making you the part of this whole catch game. Participants of this study reported being distressed in response to being excluded, and actually showed a pattern of neural activity consistent with the experience of actual visceral pain, emotional pain. Interestingly, the participants produced increased activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex to the extent that they felt distress. However, to the extent that the RVL-PFC was active, participants reported feeling less distressed by this episode of exclusion. So, when the dorsal ACC etc. are activated, they are feeling that pain, the limbic system seems to be kicking in, it seems to be making them feel that exclusion, whereas when the RVL-PFC is active and that is being recruited, it sort of diminishes their experience of pain, it diminishes their feeling of hurt that they are going through in this episode of exclusion. Interestingly, activity in the RVL-PFC was also found to be negatively correlated with the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex activity, and changes in this dorsal anterior cingulate cortex activity actually mediated the relationship between the RVL-PFC and distress. So, it seems that RVL-PFC is also to a certain degree modulating the activity of the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, which is part of this limbic circuit for processing and understanding emotional experience. Now, as I just said, so it seems that the increased RVL-PFC activity may be helping to downregulate the DACC responses, which in turn were associated with reduced distress. Okay, so the amount of distress that is being felt gets reduced by reducing the activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. That's basically what's happening here. Now, in contrast to these kind of studies which have social and physical pain manipulations, fMRI studies of reappraisal, where you're basically asked to reconsider a particular emotional scenario, reappraisal studies actually explicitly instruct subjects to engage in emotional regulation. They actually ask them to that, suppose you are feeling something like this, and now can you sort of have a relook at this picture, use some kind of reasoning and downregulate how intensely bad you're feeling about something. So, nearly all of the fMRI studies of reappraisal have actually observed activity in or around the RVLPFC along with other prefrontal regions like the MPFC and so on. Interestingly, a bunch of other studies have implicated the RVLPFC in the regulation of emotional behavior in general as well. These studies may be sort of a blend between the motor inhibition studies and the emotional regulation studies. Still, the findings actually support the idea that the RVLPFC is involved in a continuum of regulatory effects. It helps in the regulation of emotional responses, more specifically negative emotional responses. Let's take for example one study. In one of these studies, Small and colleagues, participants were required to eat a piece of chocolate during each of a series of PET scans. After each scan, participants indicated how much they wanted to have another piece. So, they ate a piece of chocolate and they are enjoying it, but again they are probably thinking about it, and then a scan is being done. After the scan, they were asked, oh, do you want chocolate? Do you want more chocolate? And they had to basically indicate how badly or how much they really wanted to have this another piece. Now, interestingly in this study, activity in the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex or the RVLPFC was strongly associated with self-reports of not wanting to eat any more chocolate despite being asked by the experimenter to continue eating it. So, see here some kind of regulation is happening. Everybody likes chocolates, everybody knows that chocolates are not good for your health. So, when people are actually saying, oh, I don't want to eat any more chocolate despite being offered by the experimenter, the RVLPFC activity is sort of kicking in. It suggests that the RVLPFC therefore seems to be involved in suppressing the desire to reject the chocolate to comply with the requirements of the study. So, eating this, so the fact that they are ignoring or refusing to eat chocolate needs some kind of regulative mechanism, and that regulative mechanism is coming from this particular region of the brain that we are calling the RVLPFC, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. Interestingly, although not framed as such in this study, the results may have implications for future work on the neural correlates of both compliance and conformity as well. So, again what we are seeing here is a very application based idea of how this particular region or activity in this particular region may be trained. We saw a neurofeedback study earlier, may be trained to help people regulate themselves better, regulate their emotional responses better, both in and also in terms of both compliance or conformity. In another study, for example, Tabibnia and colleagues, 2008, the authors examined how individuals overcome the sleight of insulting unfair offers in an ultimatum game, in a financial bargaining game, to accept advantageous offers. Remember, we've talked about the ultimatum game earlier as well. Participants were basically playing the role of the responder in several just one-shot versions. So, it's just one offer is being made, you either accept it or reject it, and that's basically the game. So, the proposer is basically asked to split a sum of money between himself or herself and the responder. The participants are all responders. Okay, so there is an experimenter who is probably playing the role of the proposer. Now, if the proposer is allocated $10, he or she may propose an even split of $5 each, or a more unfair split of $8 for themselves and $2 for the responder. So, that is there. Now, the responder will have to decide then whether or not to accept the offer. If the responder accepts, then the proposer and the responder will get exactly what the proposer proposed. So, for example, if the proposer is saying $5 each and you accept, great, you are both getting $5. If the proposer says $8 for me, $2 for you, and then you accept, then he is getting $8, you are getting $2. Interestingly, remember, we have talked about this game earlier. While refusing the unfair offer is seems to be the more likely thing, it also involves, it becomes a financially unviable decision, because if you refuse the offer, you are getting 0. If you are accepting the unfair offer, you are at least to the extent, let us say, getting at least $1, 9 and 1 or 2 and 8 in that proportion. Now, so if the responder, which are these participants, reject the proposal, neither participant would receive anything, and Either way, there is no additional bargaining possible after the responder has chosen, oh, I accept this offer or I reject this offer. A previous study of a previous fMRI study, Sanfi and colleagues, we have discussed this in the past, compared the neural responses to fair and unfair offers. So, 5 out of 10 or 1 out of 10 offers, and the main finding that they basically report was that unfair offers were associated with an increased activity in the anterior insula, a region that has previously been associated with responses of disgust. You are disgusted at the unfairness of the offer and your insula is sort of acting out. Interestingly, in this current study, the authors also included, they add a different condition where the the offers that were unfair yet still financially desirable to undergraduate participants. Okay, so while the offer is unfair, it is designed in such a way that it becomes financially appealing. Interestingly, in the Sanfi and colleagues study, both kinds of offers represented very little conflict, as $5 offers were both fair and desirable financially, whereas $1 and $2 were unfair and not that desirable. So, $1 and $2 is too less amount of money that you will sort of trample over your self-respect to accept those offers. So, to sort of create this financially desirable unfair offer, what they did was they included offers such as $5 out of 23, which were both insulting but yet financially desirable. $5 is at least enough to get you a sandwich and a cold drink. So, in that sense, while it is very less, it is in that range of being very unfair offer, but it still will get you something, whereas $1 or $2 will not get you anything. So, why would you sort of trample over in your own pride when you are not getting anything viable in return? In this case, in this manipulation, the undergraduate students at least are still getting something out of it. So, they wanted to see what is happening here. Interestingly, the authors of the current study found across a number of different analyses that the tendency to reject the unfair but financially desirable offer was associated with the activity in the anterior insula. So, some kind of moderation of the anterior insula is required, which is again consistent with Sanfi and colleagues study. However, interestingly, they found that the tendency to accept the unfair but financially appealing offer was associated with increased activity in the RVLPFC. It seems that the RVLPFC is basically helping people downregulate the disgust that they are feeling and making them accept the unfair but financially appealing offers. So, greater RVLPFC activity on these trials was found to be associated with diminished anterior insular activity, and changes in anterior insular activity was mediated by the relationship between the RVLPFC activity and the tendency to accept unfair offers. So, you can see here how interestingly the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex is modulating the activity of the insula, the instance of feeling disgust, in order to get people to accept the unfair but still financially viable offer. So, here is a very interesting case where you actually needed some kind of down regulation, because if you are so disgusted by the unfairness of the offer and you reject these offers, you are going to get nothing out of it. So, if you want to accept the $5 out of $23 kind of offer, you need to calm down, you need to reappraise this whole thing, and this is something that seems to be mediated by the RVLPFC, which is doing this by downregulating the activity in the anterior insula. So, these results were found to be consistent with this idea, again, that we have been sort of harping around in the last two lectures, that RVLPFC is certainly involved in dampening the responses of the limbic system to this insulting offer, allowing the individual to, for example, swallow one's pride and accept the unfair offer. So, again, as I just said, this is all for this current lecture. I will meet you and extend this discussion of the same in the next lecture. Thank you.